There's a thick-walled monastery that's been standing at the foot of Mount Sinai in the Egyptian desert since the 4th century. Now, a few centuries after it was established, most every Christian monastery in the Holy Land was sacked and razed when the Islamic invasion swept across the Middle East. This one was spared only because the Prophet Muhammad himself wrote and signed an edict declaring St. Catherine's to be a holy place that should stand forever to the glory of God. Now, I could go on about the mystical qualities of that place and the spiritual history it encompasses, but it sort of captures the mystique to say that as I was being led through for the first time, our guide pointed out a thicket covered in red blooms rambling along the white wall and said, now the monastery was placed here around the burning bush of the prophet Moses, which you see along this wall. Well, that was an attention grabber. I mean, it's one thing for Moses to have noticed it was not being consumed by its flames that day, but who knew it was still growing? And of course, we don't. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is that whatever Moses saw that day stopped him in his tracks. And in responding to it, his life and the lives of his people were changed forever. God blazed a trail, and Moses followed it faithfully. And where you and I come to this story, as we hear it, isn't to consider its historical value, but to examine our own spiritual history, as in, how have you responded to the burning bushes in your life? And mindful of that, how you might be better prepared to appreciate the next one. Because I believe God does occasionally light them up for us along the way. Maybe not as spectacularly and as significantly as for Moses, but they're there. In hindsight, I'm pretty sure I walked right by one the week before last. I spied a delicious-looking recipe in the paper while Polly was gone for chicken meatballs and couscous that included garlic, ginger, pine nuts, shallots, and all sorts of other tasty things, including dried tart cherries, which, since I happened to have, that sealed the deal. I was gonna make it. The first full day Polly was home for dinner. Now, I realized that 25 minutes that it said it was gonna take to cook didn't include gathering, peeling, chopping, measuring, and putting all these ingredients in their own little bowls to pour in at just the right time, while these two things were cooking at the same time, along with a skillet full of asparagus. But a bedraggled hour and a half after starting, those 25 minutes were about to begin. Polly couldn't believe I was still making dinner so long after I promised her I was coming. But I was all excited, and as advertised 25 minutes later, it had all worked out. The meatballs, perfectly brown, just as the mix of herb and spices and lime zest were scheduled to be folded into the couscous. Folded, that was the word used. Then, served immediately. The asparagus, all cooked but still firm. The drinks were poured, the candle lit, and just as I was about to fill the plates, the siren song of the cell phone. Okay, who was I about to ignore and would need to call back later, or not? But no, there they were, on the screen, Jordan and Vinny. Oh, I'm just serving a dinner I've been working on forever. Now, at least I was human enough to hand the phone over to Polly so she could visit with them while I got everything actually served out and arranged. But when I got back to say we had to eat now, well, Vinny was lifting up a book with a boat on the cover, and Jordan said she was about to read it to him. When Vinny got all excited and said, "Grandpa Phil has a boat. Maybe we could call and he could read it with us." How cool is that? But what was my response to this burning bush moment in my life? Well, you know me. "Oh, Vinny, I'm so sorry. We'll have to do that another night this week. We've got to eat right now." And we did. I was on a mission myself, and it was very important, right? But wasn't Moses supposed to be grazing his sheep? Didn't he have a place to take them to eat? What if he just thought, "Oh, what an amazing bush. Wish I had a minute to stop," but kept walking that day? No. Moses stopped what he was doing to take off his shoes so he could find out just how precious this unique moment was going to be. Sure, I asked Jordan to text me the next night or so with the time to be ready to share the book. But that's not how God works. And it's definitely not how a 3-year-old works. God had a plan. But rather than slotting us into our place in it, God presents us with opportunities. You and I are free to choose or ignore. Guilty as charged. I mean, food can be kept warm, right? God is constantly calling on you and me to keep our eyes and options open. And like Moses, to keep asking questions. Moses tried to say to God, "No." But rather than shutting the door immediately, he simply stated his case, then waited to listen to God's response before walking away, which he ended up not doing. Sure, it's good to have a plan, but it can be better, even better, to stay open to God's plan as well. I didn't even ask. Just said, "Oh, I love you," and went on with my dinner. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. But of course, the more days go by without that text, the more I realized what I missed. Now, fortunately, I haven't missed every boat that God floated my way. Decades ago, as my postgraduate retirement was winding down, I planned to end my 9 months in Europe with a 3-month Eurail pass. Everything was working out well. First, 3 months, mostly on my bicycle, followed by 3 months of going to places I wanted to stay a while, and now I was going to zip around seeing everything else and revisiting places I wanted to see more of for less than 200 mid-70s American dollars. But about halfway through, I happened on a raucous celebration in a park in Paris, honoring the bicentennial of American independence, of all things. Well, not only did it get me thinking about the real thing going on back home, but of how cool it would be to show up at Lou's wedding. When he'd asked me to be in it, I had to painfully decline, since I was going to be gone until a month after the date. But he was my closest friend from high school. We'd stayed close ever since, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought that for the element of surprise and the affirmation of brotherhood, it might be worth it. And maybe I was getting a little weary of travel. And the money I'd lose from, the third of the rail pass was certainly less than what I'd be spending on staying places, eating along the way. So I flew home just in time to get to Lou and Ann's wedding. And it was glorious. One of the best and most memorable times I could have imagined. The surprise was priceless and has been recounted many times in the many years since. But the reason it came to me after telling on myself about skipping out on Vinny's surprise request is that this decision to leave the path of my travels was a burning bush moment for me. Lou and Ann were married on June the 10th. Now, if I'd stayed away a month longer, I wouldn't have taken a surprise offer to work as the assistant manager of our swim club back home, where I'd been like an outlaw rather than an innkeeper back when I was a teenager. And that job, of course, kept me from going back to Chapel Hill right away to get another job waiting tables. And I'd have never had enough time to read this couple of books that somehow queued up memories for me of certain coincidental spiritual experiences I'd had in Europe. They got me to actually make an appointment with the new priest at my home parish to ask about seminary. Then to follow his recommendation to get an appointment with the bishop. And after his caution about acting too quickly, I still had time to apply to seminary, drive down to take everything I needed out of my cabin in the woods 7 miles outside of Chapel Hill, and show up in time to begin one of the most unlikely landings in seminary that you can imagine. Like Moses, I was woefully unprepared and ill-equipped for so churchy an endeavor. But I did drop the Southern accent, forced myself to kick a serious cursing habit, worked hard on all these revelatory subjects that were being presented in the classes at seminary, and God pulled me through with a little help from my new friend, Jesus. Now, I can join with the psalmist in saying, "Oh God, you are my God. Eagerly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a barren and dry land where there is no water." But in September of 1976, I had no idea of that. I just veered off my aimless path after crossing paths with my own burning bush and started following a new set of directions. I guess the future is always unfolding in ways that we somehow wish we could control, but can't. And that's okay. Because planning out the perfect future is God's business. Our business, like Moses, is to not just walk on by, but to keep asking questions and then follow any answers we're able to gather, following the light of Christ in faith. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.